The testimony of Judge James Hargis took place over many days in the courtroom of Judge Parker. He would answer each of his charges one by one. Would his denials of any knowledge of the alleged plot save him from the gallows? Come along with us as we walk through the testimony of Judge Hargis. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up that time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine for our flight back in time, but it convinces the YouTube algorithm that we need a bigger vehicle to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. The Breathitt County News Report. First, we are going to finish off the article from the Breathitt County News, Jackson, Kentucky, April 28, 1905, concerning the Hargis trial. Quote, Tuesday morning, Jim Hargis went on the stand and denied every material allegation of the witnesses for the Commonwealth. Denied that Mose Feltner was ever in his office or that he ever wanted James Cockrill killed. He was subjected to a rigid cross-examination by Colonel Bronston and was on the stand all of Tuesday and Wednesday and had not concluded his testimony on Thursday morning at our last reports. Unquote. It is interesting that Hargis denies that Feltner was even in his office. And it is also interesting that at this point of the trials, he denies that he even wanted Cockrill dead. He will make contradictory statements concerning this in other trials. For reference, please see our other videos on the Markham damage case and the other Hargis trial videos. The Paducah Sun Report. The Breathitt County News did not give the reader very much detail about what went on inside of the courtroom during the testimony of James Hargis. We did find a more robust version of the events that took place over the course of several days in the Paducah Sun dated April 26, 1905. Quote, Empathetic denial by Judge Hargis declares he never conspired to kill anyone. Did feel bitter towards Tom Cockrill because Cockrill killed Ben Hargis, his brother. Mixed by cross-examination. Lexington, Kentucky, April 26th. Judge James Hargis, on trial for the murder of James Cockrill, took the stand as the first witness for the defense, and after the preliminary questions as to his birth, parentage, and education, the Cockrill killing was taken up. Hargis entered a general denial of the principal statements made by the Commonwealth's witnesses. He said that he felt bitter towards Tom Cockrill because Cockrill had killed his brother, Ben Hargis. Unquote. As we go back and look at what happened with the death of Ben Hargis, we remember that he had laid an ambush for Tom Cockrill in a saloon. The two had a shootout. Cockrill was wounded and Hargis was killed. It seems that the circumstances behind Ben's death did not matter to his brothers, only that Tom Cockrill killed him, even if it was deemed self-defense. Continuing on with the article and the testimony of Judge James Hargis, quote, he made the further sensational statement that he had stated openly that he would furnish any amount of money necessary to defend any man who should kill him. He said he had no feeling against James Cockrill, and Cockrill's father was a close friend. He denied Aunt White's statements that he, White, had been requested by Hargis to take the stand in the courthouse during Tom Cockrill's trial, and when a prearranged disturbance occurred, start to kill 5 men, among them James Cockrill. Unquote. This was a sensational point of the trial that needed to be addressed. That Hargis would disturb the court while in session to rid himself of an enemy. This would not be the first time that a witness or a judge was shot at and killed in the middle of a testimony. This also happened in Perry County during the French and Eversole feuds. However, Hargis was a judge and therefore knew better than to plot any kind of action. And if we believe the testimony of Vance White, then it would show that Hargis would go to any lengths to stay in power. Continuing on with the article concerning Judge James Hargis, quote, Judge Hargis swore that on the day when Cockrill was assassinated, he was asleep on a mattress in a room over his door shortly before the shooting. King Ford awoke to tell him Cockrill was in town. Hargis said that he expressed regret that Cockrill had come to town, as he feared that he and Kirk Jett would have trouble. Almost at this instant, the fatal shots were fired, unquote. The newspaper had made a typo. It is supposed to be King Ford, not Wing Ford. But let us suppose that Hargis is telling the truth about being asleep in the office. That does not address the plot or paying someone to kill the town marshal, James Cockrill. And why would King Ford need to wake him up to tell him that Cockrill was in town? For what purpose, if he was not to witness the shooting? And why would he fear that Kirk Jett would have trouble with James Cockrill? So far, we have not been able to find any direct reason why Jett would want to confront Cockrill. Was Judge Hargis afraid that his nephew could be injured or killed in self-defense by Cockrill, just as Ben Hargis had been? Continuing on with Judge James Hargis' testimony. Quote, after the firing, he said that Kirk Jett came up into his room, and also James Brophy and Doug Hayes. Hargis called across the street to Judge Fleenor and asked who was shot. Fleenor replied Cockrill had been shot, unquote. So, why did Hargis have to ask who was shot? He was in clear-eyed view of the place of the shooting. Was he, in fact, asking if Kirk Jett was also shot? Continuing on with the article, as there is a disturbance during the court session. Quote, at this juncture in the trial, the sheriff notified Judge Parker that a man was in the hallway of the court selling verses on the assassination of Markham. The court thereupon excused Hargis and the jury and called the verse vendor into the room. He was Henry Dunnigan, a mountain man, and he was reprimanded and dismissed, unquote. Now this is interesting. Verses back then were like pamphlets or flyers. Was Dunnigan on the side of Widow Markham, or perhaps hired by the Widow Markham to hand out flyers to everyone in the court? She could have done this to try to sway the jury for justice for the murder of her husband. She was still after the co-conspirators, even though the main men who did the killing were now paying for the crime. Finishing up the article concerning the Hargis trial. Quote, the examination was then resumed. Hargis said that Callahan was not in the room, nor was Alexander Hargis in Jackson that day. Hargis made sweeping denials of all the charges of the state witnesses. Hargis was cross-examined by the Commonwealth today, and some of the questions caused him to make answers contrary to his direct testimony, unquote. As we finish out the testimony of Judge James Hargis in this article, we see that he continued his denials of the accusations that were leveled against him by the Commonwealth's witnesses. But on the cross-examination, he made statements that contradicted himself. We do not know if these statements were enough to charge Hargis with perjury. However, we could not find where Judge Parker charged him with anything after he left the stand. In next week's video, we will cover the rebuttal witnesses and the judge's directions to the jury. What would be the reaction to the judge's directions, and did these directions give the jury mixed signals? Thank you. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian feuds. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification buttons. Be sure to double check that you are subscribed, as some of our viewers are finding that they are no longer subscribed to our channel. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries in Appalachian history.